practices. So for the case of Nitro, our modules are actually broken down the same way that our College Board units are broken down. So you'll see 10 main modules, and they correspond to the 10 units in College Board. In Nitro and in MOCA, we have supplemental material that includes the labs from College Board as well. So now within a module, modules are broken down into individual lessons. So lessons generally take 1 to 2 classes to complete. Some of them are a little bit longer, a few of them are a little shorter as well. And each module contains a summative test at the end. And the summative tests are really designed to be about a 40 to 50 minute class period, usually 20 to 25 questions. Some of the tests towards the end of the course, the questions are a little bit more in depth, and the number of questions has dropped a little bit to kind of still fit in that time frame. When you start to look at individual lessons, we break the lessons down into activities, and most lessons within the CSA courses follow the same pattern, where we start with a video. We have a short quiz that is really just checking for basic comprehension. It's not a very challenging quiz, but just really kind of checking to make sure that the students watched the video. And then from there, the lessons contain 2 to 3 examples and 2 to 3 auto-graded exercises. So let's take a closer look at modules in Nitro. So as I previously mentioned, our modules follow the same order as College Board. With this in mind, you notice that we dive into objects early on in Module 2 after covering primitive examples or primitive variables. This would definitely challenge students early on in the course. From there, students cover some basic computer science concepts with conditional statements and loops. We then head back to classes and objects as students will now create their own classes. Next up, we tackle arrays and array lists. The last 3 modules include some more advanced concepts as students will take a look at 2D arrays, inheritance, and recursion. So as I mentioned, in addition to our main modules, we do have supplemental material. And in the supplemental material, we cover most of the labs from College Board. We've included most of the new release labs from last year, as well as some of the previous College Board labs that you might be familiar with from previous years. Okay, so Nitro is one of our courses. The other course that we have around CSA is our MOCA course, and it's a little bit different than Nitro, so I want to talk a little bit about that. So our MOCA course is our original AP CSA course, and it was created based on the curriculum prior to 2019. With that said, there are some noticeable differences, and we'll see a few of those as we work through our sample lessons today. First, you'll find lessons covering both abstract classes and interfaces, which are no longer in scope. Additionally, there are several topics in scope that were not fully covered in the original course. These are now covered in 9 different lessons that were added, and they were actually part of the supplemental material last year, but have recently been added to the main course. So if you're familiar with MOCA and have been using MOCA in the previous years, you actually see that there's additional lessons put into it from supplemental last year that are now in the main course. So another big difference is that MOCA simplifies the way that a program runs and how it handles input from users. Since neither of these topics are tested on College Board, we decided to simplify them at CodeHS and make it a little bit easier for students to input data into the console. And the order of the modules is also different in that it does not follow the order from College Board. This is important to note as there's a decent chance that the school year gets impacted again next year, and if it does, College Board may alter the scope of the AP test like they did this past year. And if they do, they'll likely cut off content at the end of the course, which is not necessarily the end of the MOCA course. So finally, it's important to note that the course has not gone through the endorsement process with College Board, so it's not considered an endorsed course like our Nitro course is. Okay, so we're going to get started in a second going through some of our demo lessons, but before we do, I just want to give you one last chance to register for our PD course. So again, it's codehs.com/go/8802/A, and then if it does ask you for a course ID, it's that 8802A. So I'll give you one last chance there. All right, so let's dive into our sample lessons. So today we're going to hopefully go through 3 sample lessons, 2 from our Nitro course and 1 from our MOCA course. As we go through these, I'm going to try to hit all of the parts of the lesson, but keep in mind that I may not give you enough time to actually complete the tasks because we are in this PD format with a limited amount of time. We'll take a look at a variety of different ways to present material in a remote setting, but one thing to keep in mind is that this PD has a large number of participants, probably much more than you would have in your typical class. There are times when I'd probably ask for student input, but will not given the format and size of the PD. I also wanted to mention that everything we do today can be done with either a free or pro access account. You'll see discussion questions and other resources used in the lesson. These questions are available on our lesson plans, which is a pro feature, but as a free teacher, you're always able to generate your own questions and your own content in a similar way. So as we go through today's lesson, there are parts of the lesson we're going to do together in class, parts that we're going to do in small groups, and parts that you're going to complete on your own. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with looking at lesson 1, which is Nitro 1.6. So far in the course, students would have written programs that allow for output of information, and they have not looked yet at student input or at input yet. And this is really the lesson that we start looking at input. So some of the lessons they've done so far have manipulated variables, but really not done anything focused on user input. So today's lesson, let's take a deeper dive and look at how we do student input. So we're going to have a beginning of the class discussion question here. So interacting with computers and programs can make them more interesting. So think about some of the devices you use each day. What are some of the ways you interact with devices or computers each day? So go ahead in the chat window, go ahead and type an answer to this question. So we're seeing lots of different inputs here. So depending on the device that you have, if you're on phones, you might be using touch interactions. Computers will use a lot of keyboard. I see a lot of people saying keyboard, some voice, things like that. So lots of different ways that we interact with computers. In a similar way, though, think about the programs that you use and the data that it's requesting. So what data is needed for those programs and how is it used? If you have an answer you want to share, go ahead and raise your hand, and Bianca's going to call on 1 or 2 people to answer this if you want to share.
I don't see anyone's raised hand in the participants list.
And that's okay. Again, something you can do with your class, maybe not necessarily something that people want to do right here, and that's fine.
Oh, looks like we have a few. Hold on 1 second. Johnny, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
We use Replit as an input,
Okay.
as our IDE.
Sounds good. So using Replit essentially as a console program?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's take a look. Let me get back here. All right, so we're going to start today's lesson by looking at how we can get input from users using the keyboard. So while Java can get input from other devices, most of what we want to cover this year in CSA is focus on input and output to the console using keyboard. And again, I'm going to look at, in this demo, we're going to look at a couple different ways of presenting lessons. The first lesson here, we're going to present using, going through the slides that are available instead of showing the video, we're going to actually go through the slides together using some of the notes that cover the slide. So in this lesson, we're going to cover using the scanner to get user input and the commands next line, next int, and next double. So an important aspect of computer science is interacting with programs for users. In this lesson, we're going to learn about user input. Okay, so the basic skeleton for user input uses the scanner class. We're going to take a look at each of the different parts of this. We see a few things that are new here that we have not seen in prior places. Okay, so the first bit of code that is needed is the import statement. Essentially, this code is saying that we're going to import the scanner class from Java and use it in the program. So we don't always have the scanner available to us. It doesn't always load in, but we use this import to add it into our content. Okay. The second statement that we have is the line that actually initializes our scanner. So if we look at this, it should look a little bit familiar as we saw variables in the past. This time though, we're actually creating a variable called input using the scanner data. So again, the scanner is the data type, input is the variable name, and then the new scanner is how we actually instantiate or create our scanner object. And then the system.in is the argument or the actual parameter that we're using. So system.in is a value that typically corresponds to keyboard input. And including this allows us to input data from the keyboard. Okay, so in order to receive input from the users, we must create a new variable that takes the assigned value of the scanner input and then gets the next value. Each data type has its own corresponding next command that will allow the program to receive input data. So you'll notice though, in order to get the input, you must use the scanner variable that we created, followed by that next value that we're looking for. If you do not include the variable name, you'll cause the program to throw an error, and it does not recognize the command without the scanner object. The data type that you're declaring the variable must also correspond to the input type. In this case, because next int is being used for a string variable, the program is throwing an error. Okay, so let's take a look at an example that might run. So you'll notice that it's actually asking the user for their name, which is a string, then it asks for their age, which is an integer, and then it stores it. Both places right here, we can see that it's asking using the next line command to store a string, and then it gets to the integer and uses the next int to store the age, which is an integer, and then it prints them both out. Now, one thing to know though is if I actually put the wrong thing in, I get an error and my program crashes. So when I ask for state your name, if I put in a number, it's going to work. It's going to save that number 23 as a string. But when it gets to entering their age and you enter a string, it's going to throw an error because I can't enter a string in where it is showing my age. Okay. Now this is an important idea, and one of the reasons why we actually wanted to highlight this lesson, and that is that when we have to be careful when we use next int or next double before a next line command. Okay, so when we use next int, it actually only reads part of the line. So the next int reads that portion, but it leaves the remainder of the line there. So next line then comes afterwards and reads the remainder of that line. So again, even though I might have only entered 13 and then hit enter, that portion that comes after the 13, just the carriage return itself, is all that's needed to really leave part of the line there. And what happens is that blank line gets saved as my name. And so you'll see if I go to print it out, it doesn't print anything out. And so here's an example where it walks through that. And again, you'll notice in the example here that name is blank when it goes to print it out here because it was stored. It actually never even gave you a chance to respond to the prompt. So how do we correct that? Well, we do that by essentially allowing us to have this blank line reading in. And so this next int reads part of the line. This input next line then finishes off that line, reading the rest of it. Doesn't actually store it anywhere because we don't need the rest of that line. It essentially clears the buffer out and then it allows me to input that next line in the next spot over there. Okay, so now if we look at this example where we've added that input next line buffer in, you'll see that now it's allowing us to enter the name in the prompt as we go. Okay, so just to be clear, so to clear the buffer, call a full line method without assigning a value to the variable. So the full line method is the next line, and the partial line methods are the next int and next double. And so after I read a next int or next double, I then need to go back to looking at that. Okay, so now it's your turn. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a minute to go back through the quiz at this point. Let me just pull that up. All right, so what I want you to do now is take a few minutes to go through the user input quiz. So again, you'll find this in the demo lesson. So 1.6.2 in that demo lesson is a short quiz. So take a couple minutes to work on that. And when you're done, what I want you to do is click that yes on the participant window. So if you go down to your participant, you'll find that little spot where you can click the green check mark and let me know that you're done and ready to move on. So again, as you're finishing up, if you go in the participant window, you'll be able to click the yes check mark to let us know that you are done and ready to move on. Right now, we're just taking a second to answer the questions on the quiz. All right, so I see a lot of people are done. So let's move on. So in a minute, we're going to transition into small groups. So in your groups, what I want you to do is play around with the examples. As you do that, as you explore the example, answer the following questions. So for when you're looking at the increase/decrease by 1 example, what I want you to do is run the program a few times. What happens when you enter a negative number? What happens if you enter a decimal number or a string? Then take a look at the int before string example. And this is the problem we talked about with reading an integer before a string. So what happens when you run the program as it is? And can you fix it so that it allows you to actually enter your name in there? So again, we're going to post these questions in chat, and then we're going to take about 3 to 5 minutes in breakout rooms for you to play around with the examples and talk in your groups about these questions and see what you can figure out. Okay? So Bianca, whenever you're ready to create the breakout rooms, go ahead.
All right, I'll be moving you guys into breakout rooms right now.
I think given the size and format of the PD, it's not necessarily the easiest way to have a class discussion. But hopefully you had a chance to talk in a small group around some of the examples and exercises. And I think typically a lot of students will breeze right through the examples because they know they're not really being graded. But this is a great way to kind of get some engagement and get them to practice some of the examples and play around with them a little bit. Okay, so we're going to move on now to some of the actual exercises. In this first one, we're going to actually start together. So in a minute, you're going to navigate to exercise 1.6.5, my age. So this exercise actually builds on a previous exercise that you would not have yet completed, but students would have completed this at this point. And so they would have had a hard-coded value for age and then printed out some information. This exercise for today, what I want you to do is just actually prompt the user for their age and print out their age. But let's take a look before we actually get started on it. So you'll notice that the starter code for this exercise already handles the import statement on line 1, and it also creates a scanner object on line 9, so we don't have to do any of that. To get input, we really need just to enter 2 lines of code. First, we need to tell the user what information they're going to ask for. We do this with just a standard print statement. And then second, we need to create that new variable as an integer, so if something, for example, your age, and then we need to read that in using that input variable scanner. So if you have any troubles with this one, go back to the increase, decrease by 1 example. So what I want you guys to do now is go ahead and start working on the 3 exercises. I'm going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes to kind of explore these on your own. Again, students would probably need more time to go through these exercises, but for today, we're just going to spend about 5 to 7 minutes kind of exploring the exercises for this lesson. So go ahead and work on that, and we'll see you back in a little bit. All right, so take about 1 more minute to finish up what you can with some of those exercises. All right, so go ahead and finish up with those exercises, and we're going to move on here. Yeah, and just a couple questions that I'm seeing too. So again, this is lesson 1.6. So before the students would actually get to this point in the course, they would have had 5 previous lessons. The AP CSA class can really be started by students that have not had any experience in the past. But to get to this lesson, you would have had a little bit of experience just from doing the first 5 lessons. So again, we're starting you in the middle. We're going to be jumping around a little bit today. And if you're not all that experienced with Java, there is some background that you may not get. But we're kind of trying to show you a little bit of a sample from different lessons. All right, so that would bring us to the end of that first lesson. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about some alterations that you could do to the course or to this lesson. So we tried to do a few things that are a little bit differently. So for example, instead of watching the video, we kind of just skipped that video and had a class discussion. We used the slides that are available. And I used some of the teacher notes or the speaker notes in the slides to kind of go through that. But we could actually have the students watch the video. The videos are also a great example for students to go back to. And so students that may not have picked up the concepts the first time, they can kind of go back to the videos even when you do kind of skip over a video like this. So the examples, another way students can go through these is individually. They can kind of take them self-paced and explore them. Even when we do go through them together, they're a great place to look back on. So for example, you know, the My Age lesson was very similar to that first example. And so if students are struggling with that first exercise, they can kind of go back and look at that example. Another thing we can do with the examples is we can actually start with a blank editor and write our own examples with students together. So we can do some live coding. And we're going to take a look at that in our next lesson. Okay. So right before we take a break, we want to have one more shot with a breakout room here. So in small group discussion, what I want you to do is take about 2 minutes to discuss in your groups what are some routines that you currently use in your classroom that could be used in a CodeHS classroom. So think about some of the routines that you do. How could they be applied in a CodeHS classroom, whether it's in person or virtually as well. So again, Bianca's going to create some breakout groups. We're just going to spend about 2 minutes here, and then we're going to come back and have a short break before we get into lesson number 2.
All right, I'll be moving you guys in breakout rooms in about 1 minute.
All right, as you're joining us back from the breakout rooms, we'll just wait for everyone to join. All right, so it looks like most people are back from from the breakout rooms. Yeah, hopefully you had some good discussions. We'll try to capture some of these. We actually have a slide to capture these, or a link to capture these at the end of these demo lessons. But for right now, we're going to move on and take a 5-minute break. As we do that, I just want to remind you, we do have these 3 different places, these 3 different parking lot documents. So depending on your last name, you can use these. And again, if you haven't registered for the course yet, you can go on that site and register during the break. So it is 5 minutes to the hour. So we will start back up at the top of the hour after break. So you can feel free to turn your video off for this few minutes, take a stretch break, get a drink, whatever you need. And we will start back up with our second demo lesson at the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we are going to be taking a look at our second demo lesson today, which is lesson 3.2 from Mocha. And lesson 3.2 in Mocha is getting into some methods. So we're going to start off with a warm-up question. So previously we looked at methods, and again, previously for the students, you may not have looked at them yet. But what are some of the benefits for the methods? We're going to post this link in the chat, but go ahead onto this website and quick poll here. Not necessarily a right or wrong answer to this, but just want to get your opinions. What are some of the advantages to methods that we have? So go ahead and submit this. You can submit more than one option when you check it. So feel free to check as many or as few as you think are important. And we'll just take a minute to do that right now. So again, just doing a warm-up question here. So what are some of the benefits of methods? And if you're not familiar with methods, if you haven't gotten this far in Java yet, that's okay. We still have time before the school year starts and you'll be working ahead of your students anyway. But go ahead and take a shot and take your best guess. Okay, so just looking at some of the results here, it looks like a lot of people think that methods are great for reusing code, making code easier to understand, abstracting away details gets a little bit less, and making our program shorter a little bit less too. And yeah, making our program shorter, it doesn't always. If we're only using the method once, it doesn't always make our program shorter. Sometimes it actually makes it a little bit longer, and that's okay. But it does, to some extent, abstract away details, but it depends a little bit on the method. But I think one of the key benefits that we've seen for methods is that it does allow code to be reused, and it does make our programs a little bit easier to understand as we do that. Okay, so let's take a look. So on your own this time, you're going to start watching the video for methods and parameters. Now remember, you're in Mocha this time, which does a few things a little bit different as we talked about, and we'll see this in a little bit. But you're actually not going to watch the entire video. What I want you to do is stop the video at the 2-minute 45-second point. That is just when the video gets through the slides but before they do the examples. Once you finish that, go ahead and work on the quiz. And then we're actually going to do the examples together as a class. So again, take about 4 minutes to do this. So about 3 minutes in the video and about 1 minute on the quiz. And I'll check back with you in about 4 minutes. And again, when you're finished, you can click that yes button and we'll know we're ready to move on. Okay, no, everyone's not done yet, but go ahead and wrap this up in the next 30 seconds, and then we're going to move on. Okay, so for this lesson, we're going to go through the examples as a class. And so I'm going to start with this example. I'm just going to spend a second on it and really kind of using this for demonstrating the differences between Nitro and Mocha. And you would not necessarily be flip-flopping in your class like this. Generally speaking, if you're choosing Mocha, you're going to probably stick with Mocha most of the year, and same thing with Nitro. But I did want to point out one of the biggest differences. First of all, we're using this run method instead of the main method. The second difference is to get input. Remember, we talked quite a bit in lesson 1.6 about that whole integer before a string and how that we had to kind of deal with that. Well, all of those details are really kind of taken away from us in Mocha, and we don't have to worry about that. So if I want to read an integer in, so let's say I want to replace this with a variable that we asked the user for, I can just kind of and just say, use the read int statement that we have in our console program, and just say, please enter a size. Okay, and then I can take that size here and put that there. And again, makes it a lot easier to deal with user input. So if I say 10, then I create a line break with 10. So again, I'm using that parameter. But you'll notice, again, user input is not something that's tested by College Board, which is why we've made the Mocha program a little bit easier to deal with, and students don't have to use that. So let's go ahead, though, and look at the sum example. So this example, as it is, basically just comes and takes two values, adds them together. But I want to show you, if we want to create our own, we can start really by copying what we have here. So the first part, the private, tells us what visibility does it have. So private means we can only see it within this class. The void tells us that we're not actually going to return any value from our method, and then we have to give our method a name. So let's call this one subtract. Okay, and again, I'm going to create two integer variables, and I'll call them int a and int b. And I can call them whatever I want. And notice that this is called the same thing as that. It doesn't have to be called the same, but the fact that they are called the same, they're actually two different variables here. So integer a here refers to only values in this method. This a here is different than that a, and I can use them a little bit differently. So if I say int diff equals a minus b, and then print that out. Okay, and then if I want to call that method, so now that I've created that subtract method, I can call it by the same way I'm calling the sum. So if I subtract 2 and 2, I should get 0. Okay. Now it's important to note that my method names have to have a different name, so I can't create another one with sum. And you actually see students doing that, making this mistake a lot of times. They see that we're calling it twice, and so they create the method twice. And when I do that, I try to recreate that method a second time, it's going to tell me that it's already been created. So I have to give my methods a different name, and once I've defined them, I only define them once. I don't have to define them a second time, even if I do want to call them a second time. Okay, so again, play around with the examples if you need to. Otherwise, go ahead and move on to the actual exercises. And we're going to take about 4 or 5 minutes to go through some of these exercises. And then we'll call back and finish up this lesson here. So again, take about 3 or 4 minutes to play around with the exercises before we finish out this lesson. All right, so go ahead and wrap up what you're doing and come on back to the presentation. I know I probably did not give you a lot of time to work through these lessons right now, and that's okay. We want to just kind of get a sample of what we're doing. I want to get on to demo a couple other things in our third lesson. All right, so what was a little bit different about this lesson? So first of all, we used Mocha, which is slightly different user interface compared to Nitro. So I wanted to make sure you had a chance to kind of see that. You're typically not balanced back and forth between the two versions of the course, but we wanted to give you a chance to see those differences. We also did a few things different. It's nice to mix up the class a little bit, but the other thing to keep in mind is to the extent that you want to keep your students all in one place. So if you have students that are behind, they may not be ready to start a new lesson when they need to interact with classmates. And so by basically giving them an option to see the examples together and work through the examples with the teacher, it kind of gives them a chance to see it. And if they're not ready, they can kind of go back and visit it again and revisit the examples. So we also jump right into the exercises, which again, the first time we kind of previewed the exercises for students. Sometimes your class may need that. Other times they may be ready to jump right into the exercises. Okay, so let's take a look now at our third demo lesson. We're gonna jump way down the road to Unit 9, which covers inheritance. So time's a little bit tight, and if you haven't worked through Java before, some of these concepts may be a little bit of a struggle, but lesson 1 is relatively straightforward and has some stuff that you can still do even if you're not too familiar with inheritance. So we're just going to really scratch the surface at some of these and look at a couple different techniques that we may use, including how we use a worksheet and how we can use a worksheet in a virtual setting like this. All right, so to start off, think about the word inheritance. So what are some things that you can inherit from your parents or grandparents? And go ahead and answer this in the chat. So again, what are some things that you can inherit from your parents or your grandparents? And answer that question in the chat. So yeah, so seeing a lot of things like, different genetic types of things, height, DNA, things like that. So just like you can inherit things from your parents genetically, we're going to see how different classes in Java can also inherit different things as we set up a parent or grandparent relationship within Java. So to begin class, what I'd like you to do on your own is take a few minutes to watch the video. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to tell you that the video is about 5 minutes long. I'm going to only give you about 5 minutes, which is not really enough time to watch the video. So I would suggest just watch the first 3 or 4 minutes of the video and then take a quick peek at the quiz. But we want to make sure we get enough time to get through this lesson and through some of the other pieces. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to watch the video and peek at the quiz, but you'll have to kind of cut the video a little bit short to get through that. So go ahead and do that. I have 18 minutes past the hour, so we'll come back at 23 minutes past the hour. All right, so wrap up what you're doing and come on back to the presentation. We'll get started in a second. Okay, so one of the resources we do provide in our Pro Access are some handouts. And so this is an example of how you could kind of use a handout in a virtual setup. So for a class activity, we're going to split up into breakout rooms. I'm going to have you go to this folder in this link, and we'll post this link in chat. And you're going to find different folders for, the folders are going to be numbered. And what you want to do is find the folder that corresponds to your breakout room number, and then follow the instructions on the document. And as a group, fill out that form. So one of you can fill out the form. You guys can all talk about it in your groups. So again, take about 3 or 4 minutes to complete this activity, and then we're going to come back and debrief from there. So go ahead, Bianca, and set up those breakout rooms when you get a chance.
Awesome. We'll be moving into breakout rooms in about 30 seconds or so.
had some good discussions. And again, you can use this in different ways. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second here. Just in the interest of time, we're not going to take time to actually walk through the examples and exercises, but at this point, I would have you just work through the examples and exercises on your own. What I do want to do is have an exit ticket, and we're going to post this link in the chat, or you can use your phone to snap a picture to move to this link. So go ahead, head on over to Padlet, and there's two different columns there. So post an is a relationship and a has a relationship example in Padlet. That's your exit ticket for today's lesson. And again, if you're feeling a little bit lost, and that may be because this is the second to last unit in the course and we haven't covered all the previous units, but just go ahead and try to experience what you can with this. And once you do that, come on back to the presentation. If you're still finishing up, that's okay. I'm just going to kind of talk through this next slide. If you're not on the presentation, that's okay. So just want to debrief a little bit of lesson 3. So this one used a lot more independent work. It is at the start of the unit. So it does kind of give you an opportunity to do things together. And so using that worksheet in the middle, most students should be at that point and should be together in the course at this point. But that does allow students to kind of keep together like that. And you can kind of think about how you'd maybe want to use a worksheet like that. You can use it more individual, you can use it more as homework, different opportunities to do that. If you're in a virtual setting like you may be for part of all of next year, setting it up like this where you create those different groups and have the different students working together in a group on something like that is a great idea, just to kind of give them some of that interaction and allow them to kind of work through things. But that does take a little bit of prep work, so you create the different sheets as you go. Okay, so that's the end of our 3 demo lessons. I did want to have a demo lesson exit ticket for us. So think back to the discussion you had about some different things that you could do in a virtual setup. So go ahead and head on over to Padlet for this one. And what I'm looking for here is just what's one idea that you might want to try in a virtual setting. So thinking to next year as we start, you start the last year, or if you start next year in a virtual setting, what's one thing new that you might want to try in that virtual classroom? And so go ahead and post that to those new idea, or to those Padlets, and something that you can kind of look back on and see what others are posting as well. Just take a minute to finish that up and then we'll move on. It could be something that we did or something that you've done before that you talked about in your groups. All right, so finish that up. Feel free to come back to that later if you want to come back and take a look at that later, see what others have posted as well. a good place to kind of look from there. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some other resources at CodeHS, some specific to CSA, others that are just resources available to any classes. So the first one I wanted to talk about was CodeHS Practice. So CodeHS Practice was launched last February. So our practice site contains over 100 short unit tests, Java practice problems, and it covers other languages as well, but over 100 Java questions on there in a variety of topics. Some of these can be completed independently for students, or they can actually be assigned out as a class. And I'm going to demo this in a second, but I also want to take a second before I do that to talk about the CodeHS AP CSA FRQ Center. So this was launched this past April. So our AP CSA FRQ Center contains a list of many past AP FRQ questions from College Board. The site allows for students to either complete an assignment as a text-only assignment to more closely simulate the actual AP test, or to complete it as a runnable code where they can kind of check their answers against some auto graders. Both versions can be completed independently or assigned to students. So I'm going to demo this along with our practice. So first of all, let me show you where you find these. So again, the practice you're going to find right from the home page, and these are actually available from logged in or logged out, both of these resources. So practice is found right here. If I go to toolboxes, under resources, I'll find the AP CSA FRQ Center right there. So let me go ahead to our practice site here. Okay, and so again, you see different languages that you can choose from. We're on Java right here, and we have different exercises. All of these exercises use our unit test example, so you're essentially writing a method. So for example, this problem here to lowercase is checking to see if a phrase is lowercase, and I can just type it out and test it. So phrase equal or dot equals phrase dot to something like that. And I can run test cases against it to check my work. And again, good opportunity for just quick problems that students can test on. Now the AP FRQ Center is a little bit different. Again, this is more of a CSA only resource where we take past problems from College Board and have put them in a different format for students. So for example, if we look at this song list, I can either assign the whole problem or I can assign different parts of it. So for example, if I look at part A, the text only version of it, you'll notice that the exercise is printed out just like what they would get with College Board. And so it shows the different info, and you have different pieces that says, okay, implementation not shown, and like that, we're not showing them the implementation. They still use our code editor and can type their code and see it color-coded, but they're not able to run anything. There's nothing to run, there's nothing to submit. They can't actually test it that way. If I go back and look at the runnable version of this, it's going to look a little bit different. It has the same problem set up for them, but now, where I have implementation not shown, well, I want to be able to run it, and so I actually have to implement that. And so I actually am providing the implementation. And the part that they're actually doing is still here to be implemented in part A, but I have the rest of the code around it so that it can run. And there's also auto graders that will run with it, and they shouldn't pass because I haven't finished anything. But it kind of gives the student a chance to do that. So again, different ways that students can actually go ahead and implement that. We have a few minutes here, and so what I'm going to do is give you guys about 5 minutes to play around with either practice or the AP FRQ Center, and then we're going to kind of go from there and wrap things up with some Q&A. But go ahead and take some time to practice or to use the FRQ Center and see if you have any questions from those. And just seeing a couple questions too. So both of the practice and the FRQ Center, not only are they free, but they are available even if you're not logged in. So you don't actually have to have an account, or students don't have to have an account with CodeHS to use these features. So they are widely available for people. Okay, so go ahead and wrap that up and come on back to the presentation. We're going to finish up a little bit more content before moving on. So again, so a few questions in the chat about the practice and FRQ Center. Again, once you're logged in, you can assign these to students in your class. Now, since they are able to kind of complete them without being assigned on their own, you have to make sure that when you do assign them that they're actually working on the assigned version of that. If not, they end up just having to copy their code over to the version that you assigned to them. All right, so in addition to these two resources, there's one other that I did want to highlight. That is our AP CSA review course, something that you don't necessarily need to worry about at the beginning of the year, but as you get closer to the AP test, this is a great place to have your students working through, in those last few weeks before the AP test. I always found too that students, the week or so of the AP test, they might be in and out of your class with lots of other AP tests. And this is just kind of a nice independent activity that they can kind of work on. So in addition to our main course, we do have this review that covers a bunch of different topics. So some of the lesson quizzes are actually quizzes that we've brought into the course from our actual lessons. So they're review questions that they've seen before. But then we also offer additional content with quick programming practice, very much like the practice questions, but these are different questions that are nowhere else on our site. And we do have a couple other unit quizzes where we do add additional content, additional quiz questions to it. So this is the review course. It has a little bit of a mix of stuff they've seen and new stuff as well, but a place that brings it all together to review. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Lori, and she's going to kind of go through some other resources we have at CodeHS, and then we will take some Q&A.
All right, thank you very much, Dave. So I just wanted to take a look at some of the resources that we have available for you to check out, see what else we have for you. We have the virtual learning guide, so take some time to take a look at that for some tips and hints for this coming school year. We also have some additional free workshops coming up this summer. And some of you have asked in the question parking lot about some different things like managing sections or grading or some other things. And you might want to take a look at some of these other free workshops that are available. We have another new CS teacher workshop that goes into information about managing sections. And let's see, I think we do some of the grading info there as well. And we also have an experienced CS teacher workshop coming up. So definitely take a look at that and feel free to register for any and all of those if you'd like. Additionally, there's a link for more, for more virtual events coming up. You can see a little bit of info about CodeHS Week 0 for some planning activities for your first week back to school. The knowledge base is amazing if you are trying to find some information on something on the platform. And a lot of us use that too, because the platform's huge and we're constantly doing improvements and making some tweaks and edits. So definitely take a look at the knowledge base. More links for upcoming webinars. If you have not joined the Facebook group for CodeHS educators, I definitely recommend that. Awesome active group, and that is an awesome place to actually do some sourcing, some community sourced material and find some other tips and tricks from other CodeHS teachers. We have the CodeHS teacher forum as well, a pair programming guide, and some peer review resources. So definitely take a look at our resources. Tons of stuff out there for you to take a look at. All right, and we do have a survey for you to take as well. We'd love to know about not only what you liked about our workshop today, but also anything that you would like to see or have us do a little bit differently. So please take some time to go ahead and fill out the survey, and we'll get that dropped into the chat box, or that link in the chat box for you. And let's see, what time is it? Do we have a little bit of time for some Q&A yet?
Yeah, we do.
Perfect. If anybody has any questions, you can either, let's see, why don't you go ahead and throw those in the chat? I think that might be the most manageable way to do it.
Yeah, are there any open questions from the parking lot too?
Where can we access the resources you just displayed? I'm going to go ahead and send out an email after this as soon as I have the video link ready to go. And I'll send an email to all registered participants. So you're going to have access to all of these links. We'll make sure you have all of them.
Yeah, and some of the resources that I used in the lessons, you find those in the resource section on the site. So again, from your toolbox, you'll find different resources. So lesson plans, handouts, problem guides, things like that. Some of those are available for free teachers. Others are available for pro teachers.
Dave, we did have a question on one of the question parking lots about going through the AP CSA course as a student while being in the class as a teacher. I just responded to that, that yes, you can go through the course as a student or from the student perspective as well. I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, no, you can see it. You don't even necessarily need to add yourself as a student so you can go through it.
Yeah, do not make a separate account for yourself. That was a mistake I made when I first started teaching with CodeHS, and then some lovely person from CodeHS told me I didn't have to do that. So yeah, you can certainly take a look at the question parking lot for more info on that. Let's see what else we have. And just another note as well. Somebody asked about if you can use CodeHS on the free plan for all of your courses, all of your students for AP CSA. And yes, you can. You do not have to have Pro to access the curriculum, the courses. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it before, but I may have just mentioned it a minute ago. But I was on the free plan the entire time I taught. And while it would have been amazing to have some of the Pro features, I had access to everything I needed. So I had access to all the content, all of the curriculum. I was able to make sections, follow my student progress, respond to feedback, grade exercises on the platform, and everything. You have access to everything on the free plan. Not quite everything. Everything that you need to teach the course. Oh, and the solutions. The solutions are there as well. So.
Yeah, and I before joining CodeHS as well, I taught for many years using CodeHS, and the question about the fact that some of these answers are available online, it's that's the same thing with any kind of coding that you're going to do. I think really the best thing is walking around, making sure that you see your kids actually coding and putting some of this in. We do have some cheat detection tools, but there's still ways around that for students. It is tough, in a remote setting when you can't actually see your students going. The one thing I would say is, whether you're on Pro or free, you can always look at history. So if you have students that are kind of performing at a level that you are surprised at, they couldn't write a print statement yesterday and today they wrote a 50-line code, you can go in their code history and see, did it take them 1 minute to write 50 lines of code, and check it out that way. That's usually the best way to kind of build a case to look to see if students are not necessarily actually doing the work themselves. But yeah, it's always a challenge of teaching computer science. I think it's very easy for students to copy each other.
One of the suggestions we had from a teacher at another workshop this summer was that she had her students do some journaling and explaining of the code that they wrote. And I think that is an awesome technique to integrate into your courses. Have your students explain the code or use comments as well. So another great, a great programming strategy. So.
Yeah, in code history, your document will look a little bit different, but under the More tab, you'll see history, and it shows you the history. And if you're on a free version, it only shows you like the last 5 or so, but that's usually enough to see if they are actually doing their work or not. If they've pasted their whole code in one shot, you're going to see that they've done that. And that's, again, you'll see that for the students. You have to kind of go individually for that to kind of see that.
Dave, there's another good question in the chat about pre-AP material resources for students to work on over the summer before school starts. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, they can get started with anything. In one of our courses that we have is our Latte course, which is a computer science, a Java course as well. And Latte is a nice place to start. It also starts with Carol the dog and our Carol units. Using Java code. And so that's a great summer resource for them. You can assign that one unit. You can even kind of create your section using our assignments group, where you create a Nitro section or a Mocha section, and then throw in that unit as their first unit for students to work on over the summer. It'll kind of give them a little bit of basic exposure to Java in a pretty easy format to kind of go from there.
Are there other questions? And if questions do come up after this webinar as well, certainly let us know. We're more than happy to help answer any of your questions. Any games that involve Java learning? Somebody just posted that.
Not sure. I know that Minecraft uses Java for their mods. I know I have 2 young kids that keep trying to get into that, but yeah, that's a place that you can kind of start off, and if they have an interest in Minecraft or something like that, get them working on Minecraft mods and kind of pique their interest a little bit that way. But that's actually a pretty tough learning curve as far as getting everything set up so that they can actually apply their mods.
Any other questions? Not seeing anything in chat. Are we seeing anything? Could we put the web addresses back up from the...
This slide here, maybe.
There we go.
Okay, great.
Okay, and I'll be sure to send this out to everybody so you'll all have these links readily available, and the links to these resources, all the links that Dave went through during the workshop today, as well as the link to the recording and the workshop question parking lot.
A question about Battleship. So you have Battleship. I have done Battleship with my class. It's a challenging exercise. It is actually, you'll find that in Mocha, and you can find it in supplemental material. It's not set up in our main method yet for Nitro, but it's a great resource. I actually used Battleship with students that had finished the AP CSA because it is a pretty challenging exercise once you get to the end. But it is a great project to work on that will probably take your students 3 or 4 weeks to work through. But yeah, if you haven't checked that out, you'll find that in Mocha, a good resource.
Does somebody have the link available for Mocha right offhand?
But the course code is 53. I don't have a link to sign up for that, but you can find it in our course catalog.
Yeah.
And find it that way. CodeHS.com/course/catalog.
Perfect. All right, other questions? Glancing at that.
The answer to Battleship may be online, but I've also found that no students really do it the same way. I actually took Battleship and would create that and then have them modify it as an extra assignment. And so you can really see if students understood what they did by giving them the chance to modify it at the end and kind of extend past what they're going to find online. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. If you have other questions, they can send them to hello@codehs.com.
Perfect. All right.